Chapter 5. Is she asleep? Keith stepped up behind Maggie as she closed Isabella's door. In the first second, Maggie jumped. In the second, she nodded, feeling the security his presence brought her all the way to her core. Too much excitement today. I hear you there. He followed her across the hall, and she felt his every move. You going to tuck Peter in? Yeah. Mind if I come along? He was leaning against the wall, shoulder to wrist. The hat and bandana were gone again, which wasn't helping her breathing any. If you want. She pushed the door to Peter's room open, and without waiting for him to follow, she walked over to the bed. However, when she got there, the first thing she noticed was the tears on the little face, and concern poured over her. Peter boy, what's wrong? Sad, heart-wrenching eyes gazed up at her. You're not leaving, are you? Leaving? She knelt down next to the bed and took his hand in hers, forgetting anyone else was in the room with him. Why would I be leaving? Because of what we did? His little lip quivered. I'm sorry. I didn't know Isabella was going to touch that button. Oh, baby. Compassion for him slid through her. Baby, come here. He sat up and fell into her arms, hugging her like she'd never been hugged before. I don't want you to go. Hey. She stroked his head as his desperation pulled her closer to him. Shh, it's okay. It's not your fault, remember? But I don't want you to leave. Hey, slugger. Keith knelt down on the other side of the bed, and Maggie looked at him through the darkness. He reached across the bed and ran his hand over Peter's back. Maggie's not going anywhere. I'm going to make sure of that. How he could sound so sure, she didn't know, but Peter sniffed and backed up from her. Still leaning on her, he looked at Keith. Really? Really. Now, you get on to sleep. Tomorrow's another day, and maybe we'll go horseback riding again if you want. A breath of excitement punched through the sadness. Really? Yeah, but only if you get some sleep now. Peter scooted back down under the covers, and Maggie helped him pull them up around him. However, when he was settled, she wasn't sure what to do next. You want to say it? Keith asked her when she didn't start immediately. Although it was more than her brain could handle, she nodded. She reached down and took Peter's hand in hers, and then, from across the bed, Keith offered her his. Her heart slammed into her chest as she looked at it for 1 second, and then forced herself to remember his generosity earlier in the afternoon. She laid her hand in his. Rough, but strong, just like him. It supported hers effortlessly. Trying not to think about it, she bent her head. Dear Lord, we thank you tonight for all the good things you did for us today. We ask you to send your saints and angels to be with us tonight. Keep us safe, hold us in your love, and be with us always. Amen. Amen. The deep voice and the soft one blended together, sending her heart into fits. Good night, sweet prince. She pulled her hand back, bent forward, and kissed Peter's forehead. You get some sleep. Let Jesus take care of everything else. On the other side of the bed, Keith stood. He reached one hand down to the little shoulder. Night, slugger. Maggie pushed to her feet and turned for the door. 3 steps, and she felt his presence right behind her. It was comforting and anxiety-producing at the same time. At the door, Keith opened it for her, and they stepped into the hallway. Once there, he slid the door into the jamb and turned to her. I think you've got a fan, he whispered. Yeah, well, a lot of good that's going to do me. If the day had convinced her of anything, it was that she could never be perfect enough for this place. Someday, some way, she would do something just wrong enough to be fired, and it wouldn't even have to be as major as yogurt on the ceiling. Her heart ripped in half at the thought of leaving these kids, of breaking their hearts by walking away. It would kill her, as surely as it would kill them. I gotta go. Night. Hey. His hand, coming around her wrist, stopped her from escaping into her room. What's wrong? Sniffing the misery down, she turned to him, but her gaze was on the carpet. Let's face it. I'm not cut out for this place. It's obvious. I'm not used to schedules and dressing fancy and soccer lessons and piano lessons. Mrs. Malinowski's was nothing like this. I don't know how to do any of this right. Beaten down by the need to appear perfect in a too-perfect world, she looked ready to admit defeat. Keith knew exactly where she was coming from. He'd been there. Well, it looks to me like you're doing something right. Those kids love you, Maggie, and you've only been here, what? A week? Yeah, she laughed sarcastically. And I'll only be here, what, 4 more days? She wrapped her arms over her middle, and one hand drifted up to wipe the tears from under her glasses. Face it, I'm not good enough to be here. I couldn't be if I tried. Okay, now you stop right there. He picked his hand up and held up his index finger. First of all, you have done more for those 2 kids than anyone has since they've been on the planet. Second of all, you are perfect just the way you are. She actually laughed at him that time. Yeah, right. Look at me. I've worn the same shirt for 3 days now because I don't have the guts to ask if I can use the washer, nor do I even know where it is. I got reamed out the other day because we were only 2 minutes early to dinner. And with today's stunt, well, let's just say it's only a matter of time. Keith shook his head at the list. Wait a minute. Back up. They didn't show you the house? You don't know where the washer is? Embarrassment tramped across her face. It took her more than a few seconds, but finally she sighed. They warned me not to go snooping around, so I didn't want to go looking on my own. Oh, well, that one's easy enough. He reached over and took hold of her wrist. Come with me. With her trailing him like a bike with a kickstand down, they took the kitchen stairs to the bottom level. In the kitchen, he turned to the right instead of to the left and opened a small door. He flipped the light on, and there in gleaming white was the washer and dryer. Ta-da! Now, was that really so hard? She fought the smile as long as she could, but finally it broke through. Good. Problem number 1 solved. He turned to her. Now, my next question is how you got to the end of your clothing supply in less than a week. Leaning against the open door and making circles on the floor with her toe that he realized was sticking out the front of her white sock, she kept her gaze on the floor. Because I brought everything I owned. It was all in that suitcase, the one we carried from the barn. Incredulousness dropped over him. Everything you owned was in there? How that could possibly be, he didn't know, because that suitcase weighed next to nothing. I was headed back to Mrs. Malinowski's when the dean called me about this job, and Mrs. Ayer didn't really give me the chance to get anything new once I got here. Not that I could have. I had $2 to my name the day I showed up. Still do. Processing all that she was telling him was getting harder by the minute. Okay, wait a minute. Time out, one thing at a time. Who is Mrs. Malinowski? Maggie fought the humiliation rising in her chest. Sure, there was nothing to be embarrassed about, but still, people always reacted so strangely when they knew. The forcefulness of his voice was gone, and he softened. Maggie? Hey, it's okay, you can tell me. She glanced up at him, and his face held nothing but compassion and concern. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and willed the wall to hold her up. She's my foster mom, or she was until I turned 18. Foster mom? He shook his head, a half shake. I don't understand. Willing the tears to stay in her heart, Maggie detached herself from the story as she had learned to do so long before. My parents were killed in a car accident when I was 8. She set her jaw and lifted her chin to show him she was over that tragedy, There weren't any relatives to take me, and they hadn't named any guardians in the will, so I went into the foster care system. Oh, Maggie, I'm sorry. She shrugged slightly. It's not that big of a deal. It was okay. At least it was once I got to Mrs. Malinowski's house. She was really great. She had 6 of us, all foster kids. It was chaos. But it was okay because she loved us. The worry in his eyes drilled through her when she glanced up at him. Her gaze fell again. She fought to pull it back up to his. She didn't want him to think that she was damaged goods or anything. How long were you at Mrs.? He asked softly. Malinowski. 4 years, 14 to 18. Then the state kicked me out and I was on my own for good. The state kicked you out? She shrugged with one shoulder. It's the rules. When you get to be 18, good luck. See ya. She waved her hand as if making a joke. I got lucky, though. I got a scholarship at Kingsville, so it worked out. She stifled the yawn that attacked her. Slowly, she pulled her hand up to her hair and slid it sideways through it to the back. I know what it's like to grow up thinking nobody cares. Her smile was sad. That's why I wanted this to work out so bad. He regarded her for a long moment. Yeah, I can see that. This time, she really did yawn. Man, I'm done for. I'd better get up there. We've got dance and art lessons in the morning. Oh, joy, he said, trying to laugh. More lessons. Tell me about it. I have never seen 2 kids with such tight schedules. They make Donald Trump look like a bum. With a push to get her going, she started up the stairs as he snapped off the light behind them. He was climbing behind her, of that she was sure. She could feel him there. As she climbed, she knew she had to say what was in her heart, and here, in the dark, she had just enough distance from it to be able to say the word. Thanks. Thanks? For what? He sounded surprised. For what? Yeah, right. Well, let's see. For not letting me faceplant that first day in the foyer, for carrying my suitcase for a mile so my arms wouldn't drop off, for taking us horseback riding, although I'm still trying to recover from that one. She pulled herself up the top stair. Oh, yeah, and for putting your neck on the line for me today. You didn't have to do that, you know. At her door, she stopped and turned toward him. His smile was more sad and concerned than she had ever seen it. I'm glad I did. For one single moment, all seemed right with the world. Then tension and awkwardness descended between them. Well, I'd better get some shut-eye, he said, pointing past her to the darkened hallway beyond. Yeah, you and me both. Her hand rested on the knob as she leaned her head on the door and gazed up at him. Thanks, Keith. No problem. It was nearly 5 a.m. before Keith got to sleep. He had to do something, speak up, tell his father about her. But how? It was a question that would be with him the rest of the weekend.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
This has been Deep in the Heart, written by Staci Stallings. Narrated by Becky Dowdy of Brave Hearts Audiobook Productions. Copyright 2010 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.